Man at the centre of the Serial podcast, Adnan Syed, has been released from prison. This is after more than 2 decades spent behind bars there. Now, our North America correspondent, Carrington Clarke, joins us now. Carrington's in New York. Carrington, why don't you take us back a step here for those who aren't aware or hadn't followed the Serial as a podcast? Who is Adnan Syed and what has led to today's decision?
Yeah, Adnan Syed was the focus of the Serial podcast, which really was the starting point of the true crime wave of podcasts that have really enraptured audiences in recent years. This was released back in 2014, and it really was the first one which has now become a very popular style, including in Australia, probably most famously in recent history with the Teacher's Pet podcast. And it is interesting that we've seen this happened pretty close to obviously the conviction of the protagonist, if you will, of that podcast. But Adnan Syed was a teenager when he was convicted of the murder of his ex-girlfriend, Hai Min Lee. And the Serial podcast, over 12 episodes, worked through that case and raised real questions about the investigation and the evidence that was used to convict him. But what is fascinating is today it really was a major plot twist where we saw Adnan Syed walk out of the courthouse. He was unshackled. He isn't completely free. He now has a tracker attached to him. And we have a situation where the prosecutors now have 30 days to decide whether or not they want to retry this case. But the reason he was unshackled today was because the prosecutors said to the judge that they believed that the original trial was based on bad evidence and that they do believe that there are now 2 suspects who weren't originally looked into in the way that they should have been, which raises real questions about whether or not he received a fair trial. And we did hear from the prosecutors today at the time that Adnan Syed was released.
We're not yet declaring Adnan Syed is innocent. But we are declaring that in the interest of fairness and justice, he is entitled to a new trial. And because this is an ongoing case, there are limits to what I can say in this matter, but it is imperative that we start the process of securing a new trial with adequate representation for Mr. Syed to ensure that the family of Ms. Hai Min Lee knows with full confidence that the person responsible for her death and the death of their loved one will be held accountable.
So he has served more than half of his life. He's now a 41-year-old man, 22 years in jail. And as the prosecutors say there, that they want, they're not saying that they believe he is innocent, but that he was convicted using evidence that they now believe to be suspect. The question, of course, is whether or not now they are going to try to force a retrial. Many legal experts suggesting that that would be unlikely, given the length of sentence he's already served, and also these questions that have now been raised about that evidence.
Yeah, what an amazing twist so far, though, Carrington. Now, I imagine there are some limits on what Adnan Syed can say himself, or for that matter, even his family. So have we heard any response from what we might describe as his camp, Carrington?
Yeah, so we have heard from the lawyers representing Adnan Syed. It should be pointed out that the Serial podcast was a raging success. Millions of people around the world listened to it. But what was perhaps even more interesting is that it spawned other forms of journalism, people taking both sides of the camp, some supporting the family of Hai Min Lee, the victim of a murder for which Adnan Syed was convicted. They say that the prosecutors haven't done enough, they didn't give them the chance to give their opinion on whether or not they should be asking for the release of Adnan Syed. So that's still a live question to be looked at, and obviously their family is now grappling with this huge plot twist. They thought that the man who had killed their daughter had been convicted and was in prison, and now that has obviously been thrown into question. But we did hear from Adnan Syed, who was supported both by his family but also by his lawyers.
Today, the evidence in Adnan's case has finally led to his freedom. As you can imagine, it is an emotional day for him and his family. He will not be making a statement at this time. He asked you all for privacy so that he can start to heal. Thank you again to everyone who believed in Adnan.
So an extraordinary result, another major plot twist. It does feel like this may be the end of the journey for Adnan Syed, but it remains to be seen. Given how many plot twists there have been in this saga so far, it would seem only right that there might be another one to come. But an extraordinary day here in US justice.
No, there may well be further twists, that's for sure. Carrington, thanks for scrambling on that breaking news story. Carrington coming to us from New York City.